Hello everyone, I'm Hunter, and thank you for checking out Unexpected History. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. In this video, we're looking at one of the strangest mysteries I've ever come across, the Mad Trapper of Rat River. A man calling himself Albert Johnson came to Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories on July 9, 1931, by way of the Peel River. He gave little information about his identity to Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable Edgar Millen when the latter asked him if he was prepared for living in the area. According to Millen, the man had a vague accent that sounded Scandinavian, was generally well kept and clean-shaven, and had plenty of money for supplies. Johnson rafted the waterways, eventually coming to the Mackenzie River Delta, where he built himself a small 8-foot by 10-foot cabin on the Rat River. He hadn't acquired a trapping license, which was an odd thing for someone living in the wilderness at that time. Native trappers began complaining about Johnson to the RCMP in December, claiming he was tripping their traps, hanging them in trees, and just generally interfering with their ability to make a living. There are differing reports about officers' interactions with Johnson during the investigation into these claims, but more often than not, the RCMP claimed that Johnson used colorful language to tell them to take off and allegedly pointed a firearm at them. On the 26th of December, Alfred King and Joe Bernard, two constables of the Archaeology RCMP detachment, made the 60-mile trek to Johnson's cabin to ask about the trapper's allegations, but the man refused to even acknowledge their presence, let alone talk with them, even going so far as to cover a window as King was looking inside. After multiple attempts to get Johnson to talk with them failed, King and Bernard returned to Archaeology to get a search warrant. 5 days later, King, Bernard, and two other men arrived at Johnson's cabin with that warrant. Again, Johnson refused to talk. Constable King then decided to force the door open, but no sooner had he started this effort, Johnson shot him through the door. After a short firefight in which nobody else was hurt, King's team returned with him to Archaeology. His wound wasn't life-threatening, and King did recover fairly quickly. Soon after, the decision was made to put together a posse of 9 men and 42 dogs to head back to Johnson's cabin. They fully intended to force the man out of his cabin, and for this reason, the group also brought 20 pounds of dynamite. Once they arrived at Johnson's, after thawing the explosives inside their coats, at least one charge was thrown onto the roof of the cabin. But here's where accounts begin to differ in small but seemingly significant ways. One report said the explosion from the dynamite caused the cabin to collapse, but when the posse tried to rush the debris, Johnson began shooting at them from a dugout under the ruins of the cabin. A dugout is basically a hole dug in the ground which could be used as a fairly primitive shelter for people or animals. The official RCMP report of the incident contradicts this account, at least partially, saying that the dynamite did very minimal damage, but the cabin was destroyed later to prevent Johnson from returning to it. No one was injured during the firefight, but after a 15-hour standoff in the 40-degree below zero weather, the posse returned to Archaeology to get more help. Blizzard conditions delayed the return of the now reinforced posse to Johnson's cabin until January 14th, but they found that the man had left the vicinity. They immediately took up a pursuit, and eventually caught up to him a little over 2 weeks later, surrounding him in a dense thicket. Another firefight ensued, during which Johnson shot and killed Constable Edgar Millen, who, if you'll recall, was the first of the Mounties known to have interacted with Johnson. Once again, the posse fell back, and once again, they were reinforced. Among those reinforcements were a number of native trackers from at least 2 nations, as they were better suited to move quickly through the rugged terrain and harsh weather conditions. Johnson, on the other hand, had no intention of sticking around, instead making his way overland for the Yukon. As soon as it became clear what his intentions were, the RCMP attempted to prevent this by blocking the only 2 passes over the Richardson Mountains. Remarkably, Johnson bypassed the blockages by scaling a 7,000-foot peak, disappearing into the vast wilderness again. Johnson's escape over the mountains went unknown until it was discovered by a pilot hired by the RCMP to scout the area. World War I fighter ace Wilfred "Wop" May spotted his tracks on the other side of the mountain range, although the tracks seemed to end near the frozen Eagle River. Following a hunch, May overflew the river for the next several days, eventually discovering the man's tracks again on the 14th of February. Johnson had been walking the ice in the middle of the river, disguising his tracks by using the trail already left by caribou. This allowed Johnson to move much faster than anticipated without using his snowshoes. His trail was only spotted because of the need for Johnson to make camp at nights on the riverbank, necessitating leaving the caribou trail. Wilfred May contacted the RCMP via radio to relay what he'd found. 3 days later, the Mounties finally caught up to Johnson as they rounded a bend in the river. Although the man was still several hundred yards away, his rather ingenious way of hiding his trail now worked against him. Foregoing the use of his snowshoes now meant the deep snow off the caribou track severely hampered Johnson's attempt to make for the riverbank. When it became clear that running was no longer an option, another firefight broke out between Johnson and the posse, but this time, things didn't go Johnson's way. He did manage to shoot Constable Alfred King, again, seriously wounding him this time, but Johnson's luck ran out shortly thereafter, when a bullet entered his left side, the damage from which finally put an end to the man now known as the Mad Trapper of Rat River. According to official reports of the incident, the only sound Johnson made throughout the entire chase was when he laughed briefly, and somewhat maniacally, after ending Constable Millen's life. In the aftermath of the final shootout, officials found that the Mad Trapper had covered at least 85 miles from his homestead over a period of 33 days, through some of the harshest conditions, both weather and terrain, in Canada, and possibly the world. They also determined that Johnson was burning as many as 10,000 calories per day during his trek to evade the law. What made that trek even more remarkable is that in 2007, a documentary team, with assistance from several forensic specialists, discovered that the Mad Trapper accomplished these nearly superhuman feats with, judging by the conditions of the skeletal remains, a slightly deformed spine and tailbone from scoliosis, along with one foot being longer than the other. The Mad Trapper of Rat River has never been definitively identified, although that may eventually change thanks to DNA samples taken during the aforementioned documentary investigation. Pictures taken of Johnson by the RCMP after the chase ended were distributed throughout North America, but yielded no results. The initial investigation that proceeded directly following the incident seemed to focus on one Arthur Nelson. Not much is known about Nelson except he traveled from British Columbia into the Yukon just prior to the events of the Mad Trapper, and owned similar weapons. In the late 1980s, it was theorized that Albert Johnson could have been an ex-con named John Johnson, a repeat offender from North Dakota, who had been incarcerated at both San Quentin and Folsom prisons at one time or another. John Johnson had actually been born Johan Conrad Johnson in Bardu, Norway. Genetic tests that compared the Mad Trapper's DNA with a great-nephew of John Johnson would later disprove this theory. The Johnston family of Nova Scotia have claimed that the Mad Trapper may have been Owen Albert Johnston, a relative who left Canada near the start of the Great Depression for the U.S. to seek employment. The last contact the family had from Owen Johnston came in the form of a letter mailed from Revelstoke, British Columbia in 1931. There were plans as of 2009 for DNA testing various members of the Johnston family against the Mad Trapper's DNA, but I could find no record of any results at the time of this recording. As previously mentioned, the team from a documentary about this incident, titled The Hunt for the Mad Trapper, which can be found in its entirety on YouTube, performed modern forensic testing on Johnson's remains, alongside the taking of DNA samples. A detailed isotopic analysis of Johnson's teeth intimated his childhood was Scandinavian, but he was more likely from the American Midwest. They also found the scoliosis and several gunshot wounds from his final battle with the Mounties, including the fatal one which entered his pelvis from behind. Although his identity still remains a mystery even today, in 2021, Othram Incorporated, a world-renowned forensic genealogy company, traced the Mad Trapper's ancestry to Sweden, eventually linking him to descendants of Britta Svensdotter and Gustaf Magnusson from a number of Swedish towns. Further testing is ongoing. The mystery of the Mad Trapper of Rat River has intrigued me ever since I heard about it several years ago. From his identity, to the month-long chase through some of the most rugged terrain on the planet, during the dead of winter, in an area where temperatures routinely rival some of the coldest places on Earth, to how he managed to stay on the run that long given his medical condition. Even whether he had anything to do with the meddling of the traps that began this entire saga is up for debate. I really hope that, at the very least, his identity is figured out in my lifetime. I'd like to offer a very special thanks to my one and only Patreon supporter, Sue, for helping make this video possible. If you'd like to support the channel, my link tree is in my bio. From there, you can find the links to my Patreon page, my Buy Me a Coffee page, Venmo, and PayPal. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, I hope your day is pleasantly unexpected.